Meet Kurt Merriken, an all-American custom knife maker from Florida. Prior to recently becoming a full-time knife maker, Kurt worked for the fire department, saving lives. Kurt fell in love with knife making watching others like Tough Thumbs, aka Jeff Blauvelt, by making knives by hand. The two aspects of knife making Kurt enjoys is working with his hands and the artistic side of the hobby. And he's been a hobbyist since 2017, but in 2020 he made the leap into a full-time custom knife maker, taking the knife world by storm. Kurt has various models, and the future looks very bright for him. Currently, Kurt accomplishes his work using manual mills and a 2x2 grinder and a bandsaw. In the future, he plans on growing his shop and perfecting his skills to achieve even higher quality and attend even more great knife shows. It's a large feat for such a small operation, in my opinion, so you guys should definitely keep your eye on Kurt. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Knife Box channel. So today we've got a really cool custom knife to talk about. Today, as you saw, we're going to talk about the Kurt Merriken Custom Phantom. So very nice pouch it comes in. Unfortunately, mine blew apart right here. But you do get the exchangeable Velcro pouch, so I'll probably swap out pouches at some point in the near future. But it did come out very nice. I know sometimes I pack my stuff a little tight, so it's probably why that happened. Then you also get a factory Weha T8 that comes with your knife. And then you also get this other kind of like L-shaped piece right here, another Allen or Torx type tool right there, and that's probably for the hidden hardware side of the knife. So you get all the tools to take it apart, which is really quite cool. On this side here, you're going to get your knife, and here's mine right here, the Custom Phantom. Very beautiful piece. Very proud of it. It was a very nice acquisition to the collection. And then you also get this certificate of authenticity. And in the back here are all the specs. This is the model, the Phantom. It's got a 3.5 inch blade in W2 Hamon, and you can get these in 4-inch as well, I believe. This is the first Phantom Bolster Lock. I don't even know. It might actually be his first Bolster Lock, period. But yeah, very cool with some vintage Westinghouse Micarta scales and collars. And we got some ceramic bearings with a steel detent ball and zirconium backspacer and clip. Birthday is April 8th, 2021. Coincidentally, my daughter's birthday. And you got Kurt's signature right here with his information and his little mission statement, which I think is really cool. It's kind of important to know that these guys care about where you're spending your money, and the fact that you care, or that they care, to leave a mission statement of what they're trying to accomplish here. Is it just to get your money, or is it to build the best product that's out there? So, and in all honesty, I've spoken to Kurt over the years and interacted with him a few times, and I can tell you right now, quality is definitely his utmost focus, and so is customer service. He's very approachable, very nice. I've met him at the shows in person. He's just a really cool dude. So why did I pick the Phantom out of all his crazy models, and he does have some crazy models. And I think that's the reason why I picked this one to start with, because this one is just a little bit more simple in the aesthetics department, and that tends to be what I go for. But it still has quite a bit of flair, and we'll talk more about that as well. So let's go ahead and just get some sizes out of the way here. So I don't usually do this a whole lot on tabletops, but being that this is a custom, you may not find a lot of specs online. So the blade, as you can see, is about 3.5 inch from the bolster to the tip of the blade. From the tip of the bolster to the end of the scale here, we're about 4.7 inches. The overall length here, we're about 8.1 to about 8.2, which is a good, nice overall EDC size. It's not a small knife, and it's not a large knife. And I tend to buy a lot of knives kind of in that in-between realm. I do wear a medium to large size gloves. I'm kind of got a medium size hand, so that works out well for me. So I went with the 3.5 inch Phantom, and as far as the material choices, those were just made based on the fact that I like vintage stuff. And this has like a lot of historic blade making, artistic cues, and as well as some old school materials, which gives it a nice kind of warmth feel and look to it. So I really love that. All right, guys, so let's do some size comparison here. Oh, before we do, let's do a wrist check. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and do some size comparison. So one of the household names, of course, is the Spyderco PM2, which everybody is very familiar with. And I thought this was a great comparison because overall length, overall size, handle length, they're pretty dead on, almost identical actually. Another one that I thought was pretty dead on or identical was also the XM18 3.5 inch. These also kind of sized up very similar, as long as you're lining them up pivot to pivot, which is how I like to kind of check my knives, because even if you have like a 9.5 inch knife, you know, the blade to handle ratio could be off, and usually to visually see that blade to handle ratio, I like to line them up pivot to pivot. That's the best way. Next, let's bring out some more XM18s, or actually another one. Let's bring out the 3 inch so you can kind of see where this stacks up. This against kind of a smaller 3 inch knife. And then, of course, let's bring out the big bad boy, the XM24, which kind of dwarfs it. So that's kind of what you're expecting when you order the 3.5 inch Phantom. Now, keep in mind, Kurt makes one this size as well if you want to order it. I just went with the 3.5 inch version. So now, in the spirit of handmade customs, let's bring out a couple handmade customs just for size comparison here. So here's one from my good buddy Fernando Medina. This is the full custom Hellcat. This one's dressed in zirconium and some vintage micarta. Let's bring out the Chupacabra from Casey Middleton in Old Dominion Knife Works. And let's bring out this McNeese custom Tangent here. Just a more of a little smaller pocket, everyday carry type knife. So this is kind of where it sits in the spectrum, and some really good pieces to look at there. As you guys can see, I really like those natural copper and micarta tones. It's just something that really speaks to my eye, I guess. I really just love that patina look. So that's gonna do it for the size comparison. So let's get a weight on this guy, see how much this bad boy weighs. Now, keep in mind, it does have Micarta scales, which is kind of a lighter weight material, but it is a full titanium liner frame lock, I guess you could say. And then the zirconium accents, as small as they are quite heavy in material. And let's not be shy about that blade stock either, right? So let's take a look here what we got, and we are at 4.28 ounces. So not too shabby at all, actually. I've had this knife for over a year, and I'll tell you, every time I carry it, it's very comfortable and very easy to carry. And the weight really is not a big deal to me. Not that 4.8 or 4.28 ounces is much. But if 4 ounces is a bit much for you, there are other attributes to a knife that make it easier to carry. For example, how smooth the scales are, the shape of the knife when it sits in the pocket, how slender it is. All those things are kind of a overall factor. Now, as far as thickness of the knife, let's take a quick peek here. And let's go ahead and check the blade stock. So on the blade stock side here, we are at 0.17 inches thick. As far as the handle thickness, we are at 0.67 inches thick. So not too bad, you know. I want to say that without the clip, we are at 0.52. With the clip, 0.67. I mean, just the overall footprint to me, it's actually fairly slim, which is pretty cool because you get a nice beefy blade stock right here. Now, as beefy as the blade stock is, you're going to see right off the bat from the way the light goes off of it, that it's got a very hollow grind to it. And it starts very, very high and goes very shallow and stays very thin all the way through. And a lot of the flare to the thinness goes all the way to the end of the blade, which is really nice. So let's talk about this blade. So overall, on the front end here, we got a Tanto profile. And this one kind of reminds me of like a samurai short sword in the way that it looks as far as the blade shape. And it kind of stays true to that Japanese blade or sword making aesthetic, which I think is really quite cool. To kind of further that Japanese artistic touch, this one's got a W2 Hamon on it. Now, W2 steel in itself is not a Japanese used steel, but the clay Hamon process is something that actually was developed by Japanese sword makers. And at that time, the Japanese sword makers would apply clay to the spine, and then they would heat the blade up really hot to heat treat it and quench the blade. And what that would do was harden the steel around the blade to give you a nice, keen, hard edge, but then it would give you a bit of a softer spine up here where the clay was applied. And you can see that differential line right here. And what that does is when basically samurai's sword would impact, they would have more springiness to it and absorb more shock versus being hardened all the way through and have more capability to shatter. So kind of cool, you know, you got really quite a bit of very cool Japanese historical sword making techniques put into this custom knife right here, which I think is really cool. Now, W2 is a great blade steel and a tough blade steel on its own. It's more commonly found on fixed blades, which is why I find it kind of cool on a folding knife. The one downside, guys, you do have to oil it to prevent it from corrode. That's just one of those things. All I do is I apply a bunch of mineral oil on this blade, and when you do it, don't forget to apply it in here too, guys, because that's usually where a lot of these higher rust-prone steels will rust. A lot of times people oil the blade and they forget about the back and kind of the pivot area. So if you store these knives, that's definitely something that you should keep in mind. So next part of the blade that I'd like to talk about is this flipper tab. It's really nicely designed. It's also integrated with a nice sharpening choil here with a nice deep plunge. All looks very aesthetically pleasing. But what I really like about the flipper tab is how well it's rounded out and positioned. Now you do have a little bit of jimping traction up at the top and a little bit here up at the front end, but it's not overly aggressive. So you got plenty of traction, but the detent is not overly strong. So you just got a very nice, easy, positive flipper deployment. As far as the way a flipper knife should function, as far as the way that the geometry sits in correlation to the pivot, I think you got kind of a perfect type of flipper deployment design right here, which is really quite nice. Now, moving on to the pivot area itself, you can see you got these nice custom pivots right here that are very cleanly decorated with some Westinghouse Micarta pivot colors. And I think that was a really nice choice, and it was very, very nicely fitted. The bolsters themselves are part of the frame. They're all titanium and dark blasted. The bolsters themselves are all titanium and dark blasted, which looks really nice and gives it a nice contrast between that nice Westinghouse finish and kind of like that patina look and a nice dark blast. So really nice there. Does run on ceramic bearings, as I'd mentioned earlier, but it does have a stainless steel lock bar insert. Moving on to the handle. The scales are Westinghouse Micarta. And if you guys aren't familiar with Westinghouse Micarta, there's thousands of videos out there, but it's just basically some sort of resonated material that they use to make furniture, they used to make airplane parts, they used to make all kinds of stuff back in the day. And as it sat in the warehouses or on different parts over the years, it just had this really aged patina look to it. And people make cue balls out of it, people make all kinds of stuff, jewelry, and a lot of knife makers use it. So we went ahead and sourced some of this stuff. And what really makes it kind of fun is the fact that when you start to contour the knife and you see the edges of the Westinghouse Micarta here, they kind of go from a caramel to kind of like a white, kind of like a flan color, you know, like that dessert. Oh, I love that stuff. Anyways, so that's what you have right here, and you can see there's only 2 screws on each side, and he even tried to conceal one of them with the clip, which is kind of clever to do. So nicely done right there. Mentioning the bolster lock situation, so that's something else that's also very cool and unique and artistic about this knife. Traditionally, what most people know is the liner lock, which is kind of where like most of this stuff started. So you'll have a knife with basically 2 different sorts of materials, and you'll have a liner in between. Now this one is kind of a different sort of liner lock. It's a top axis one versus a bottom one, but you kind of get the idea. That's where the lock goes and meets the back of the blade tank. So that is kind of what's cool about liner locks, is you can have the same handle material on both sides. And some of my friends do prefer those. I know my buddy Dirk loves liner locks. And then here's another good example of a liner lock right here. So you got your liner that goes right here, and then traditionally bolsters will sit up at the top flush underneath the liner, as in such. So now on this one, This is a request I had from Kurt, and he took it with no fear. He decided to go ahead and build me a bolster lock. Now, this is complicated for a lot of reasons. One of them being the tolerances between the scale and the frame lock piece here is kind of a tricky ordeal. It has to be just done. It has to be done just right, and three different things have to be factored. First of all, when the blade locks up, where is this all going to sit in correlation is one thing you have to keep in mind. Number two, there's a detent ball in there, so when you go to close the knife, this lock bar right here will sit in its furthest orientation because it's rolling on the blade right here until it falls into the little detent ball that's put inside the blade. And then all those tolerances have to be kept in mind. So in other words, you could have some really nice ugly gaps right here. You could have an ugly gap right here if it's not done just quite right. And you can see Kurt just absolutely executed this with absolute precision. And I mean precision. Look how snug that sits. And then as you close the knife, it sits and falls into the detent ball just in the right place. And it has just the right amount of space to allow that lock bar to travel out as it opens up and the detent ball rolls on the blade. So pretty cool. It's a lot of work, guys, and sometimes people don't realize how much is involved with these. Another thing to highlight, he did take the time to chamfer the inside to give you easy access to the lock bar, which makes the opening and closing experience very pleasurable on this knife. And then of course, let's not forget to highlight the action. The ceramic ball detent system is always a great way to go. Another thing that I noticed about this knife is the sound that it makes. It almost kind of has a pling when it meets the stop pin. And you can hear it, it goes bling. One more time. Pretty cool. It's got a very nice, unique sound to it. Now, another thing that I'd like to highlight, and of course we should, is that the stop pin is hidden. Unlike, a lot of other knives, you can actually see this one in bronze right here. That is where usually the blade will meet up to the back to lock it up. On this one, he went a step further, and it's all integrated in the inside. My guess is the stop pin is going to be pressed in right there where that little tooling hole is. So very, very nice. Really didn't skip anything on this knife. It's just a fully decked out, beautiful custom. So let's talk about some of the highlights on this knife. First off, let's talk about the Japanese historic artistic highlights between the Japanese Hamon and this blade shape that really kind of resembles the Japanese wakahashi that the traditional samurai carried as a spare short sword secondary to his sword. And that's kind of what this blade profile reminds me of. Also, I want to highlight the vintage materials, of course, the Westinghouse Micarta with the zirconium accents on the pocket clip and the back spacers that have all been darkened. It just gives it a nice warm feel to it. This knife is truly a one of a kind, and I'm sure there's going to be others that look similar to it as Kurt builds more and more of these. But this one is definitely unique to its own, and that's what I love about handmade custom knives, is that they truly are yours and built for you. And I love tailored knives. The action and the sound, of course, is something great to highlight, and of course, let's not forget about these ergonomics. The knife is truly comfortable in the hand. Despite any of like the appearance of these edges, they've all been rounded nicely, and you can even see evidence of the chamfering and rounding on the titanium and also on the Westinghouse scales. The jimping is just in the right place on top of the blade here. It does have actually relatively quite a bit of traction, but it's not overly bearing where it's gonna really tear the crap out of my finger up. The handle does have a little bit of shaping and contouring to it, but it's still relatively something that I would consider fairly neutral, with just a little bit of retention in the back, which I like that little bit of flair. So very nicely designed handle, and overall very aesthetically pleasing as well. You know, it's unique, it's fun, it's very nicely made, and it's comfortable in the hand. What more do you want out of a knife? As a matter of fact, if this was the one and only knife, I'd totally be okay with that. It's just that well made. So if you guys haven't had a chance to check out Kurt, keep an eye on this guy. He's making some incredible stuff, and you're not going to want to miss out on his stuff. So anyways, guys, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to go check out me and Dirk on EDC Hour. That's our new YouTube channel where him and I get together once every 2 weeks, and we talk knives and EDC gear. So there you have it, guys. Thanks for joining me again, and we'll see you guys all on the next one.